So today is my wife's birthday. I want to do something really special this year. So I'm going to be doing a combination of a build that's going to integrate with something she really loves, books. She has so many books, it's ridiculous. And they're mostly antique books. She's a huge collector, and as someone who's studied in archaeology and geology, she has a really diverse set of interests for these books. Currently they're scattered all over the house. She's been collecting them for years, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't actually know exactly how many books she has, the names of the books she has, and she really has no way of keeping track of her whole library. So after a little bit of digging, I found this app called Libib. It's basically an online library. They do have a free version and a paid version. For my purposes, I'm going to be using the free version. Also, by the way, this is not sponsored. I'm just trying out this app to see how it goes. So basically the idea is I'm going to first go through her entire library and I'm going to input all of the data from those books, the titles, authors, publishers, price that she paid for them if it's in the book. And this is going to take a really long time because she has a ton of books, but I think she'll be really grateful to have this all done. She just really doesn't have time to do it herself. So I'm going to do it instead. Now for the second part of this gift, I'm going to do a build. So I found this cool idea on Etsy of a sort of triangular book holder. When you're reading a book, it's a place to set it down and it will hold your place in the book, as well as display the outside of the book in a nice way. Additionally, there's some space inside this triangular sort of book holder thing where you can put sunglasses, car keys, wallet, whatever. Since this is a special build, I did go to my local hardwood supplier and I picked up this really nice piece of walnut for the build. It is the most expensive piece of wood that I've purchased to date, but it looks really nice, and I'm not going to be using all of it for this build, so I can use it for future builds. It is also S3S, so I don't have to do very much to it at all in order to use it. That means that I just need to trim it to size and then make sure that the last edge is straight, which I can cut easily on the table saw. For the design, I'm just going to be going with what I found on Etsy. It's basically just an acute triangle made up of 3 different boards glued together. Really simple. The only 2 new things about this build for me are going to be cutting an acute angle, as in over 45 degrees. And that's a new challenge, so I'm going to be figuring out how to use the table saw to do that. The other wrinkle in this build is that I haven't used any walnut before, and it is a very nice wood, so I'm going to want to be extra precise and extra careful with this build. For the finish, I'm just going really simple, and I picked up this hard wax oil that I'm going to be using just to make the grain pop. Walnut is such a gorgeous wood on its own. I don't need any kind of stain or color. I just need something to make it pop and protect it a little bit. That's the basic idea though. Let's cut to it. So when you first get into Libib and you've opened your account, you see a whole bunch of options on their dashboard. It's very intuitive. You can make a ton of different collections. I'm just making one, and you can add a whole bunch of different items, books, movies, music, and video games, but it's all very, very tidy and clear. They also have a mobile app, which was pretty critical to me as I was going to be moving around a lot. Most of the input I did with typing, but I also used voice input for some of the descriptions.
Of Tolkien's mythology and its relationship to the myths of the ancient world.
And in general, this worked super well. The only thing that would really hold me up when I was inputting this data was the books themselves and it being unclear about things like publisher date, or even sometimes it being in another language and I'd have to use Google Lens to translate it so I could actually input the data. This part of the process was obviously quite laborious, but also really fun. I came across a ton of cool books like this print of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. A lot of the books were also really, really old, like this book right here from 1788. I had to be really careful actually handling this book. Just such a cool piece of history. Now, the app for Libib does actually have a barcode scanner, which worked great for a lot of my wife's old college textbooks or her modern science books. However, most of her books are antiques, and so that didn't really help me, and I did a lot of manual data entry. I'm not even showing you all of the time-lapse footage that I took because it took so long. I now know that my wife has 447 books in her entire collection. But as I kept going, I definitely got into more of a rhythm, and also I had my dogs to keep me company, which helped a lot. After about a week of doing this basically every day, I was finally ready to move on to the build portion of this project, and I was excited to do so. So the first thing I did is I measured out this piece of walnut. It is absolutely gorgeous, basically no defects or any fillings that I need to do. I made a few rough measurements of the part of the board that I thought was going to look best for this build, and then I brought it over to the miter saw to cut it into 3 pieces. I did not measure these pieces precisely because I just knew roughly how big I wanted them to be, and I was going to set up a stop block anyway. So after making my first cut to make sure I just had a straight edge, I set up my stop block and got to cutting the other 3 pieces. With my 3 pieces cut, the next step was to arrange them in sort of a waterfall style pattern. So after flipping the boards around a little bit, I was able to line up the grain patterns correctly. Then I brought it over to the table saw to make sure I had a straight edge. First, I lay all 3 boards down against the fence with the edge that I knew was straight. And then I aligned the fence based on the shortest board so that I knew that when I ran them all through the table saw, they would be the same width and all have straight edges. Working with S3S wood was super convenient, and it meant that I really had to do minimal cutting to make sure that I had flat and square boards. The next step of the process is to take this jig that I made, and this is used to cut an acute angle. So in my case, I want a 60-degree angle. The idea basically is that you take your board and you clamp it vertically so that you already have it at a 90-degree angle, and then you subtract based on the angle of your saw blade the amount that you want. So my saw blade is set to a 30-degree angle, and if you subtract 30 from 90, you get 60. I'm not gonna lie, this section was hard to make precise. I think my jig was too small. I didn't spend enough time making it rock solid, and also the fact that I have a contractor saw didn't really help anything because the table face of the saw is actually quite small. But I went really slow, and I tried to keep everything locked in as much as I could, and I was able to get some pretty decent cuts. In this shot in particular, you can see that there's a little bit of wobble in my jig, and I probably could have done a better job setting up my table saw perfectly so that my fence was perfectly straight and the table saw blade was the perfect angle. I also will say my table saw blade is not that good, and there was a good amount of sort of grainy fibrous material at the end of each board, but with a little bit of sanding that came off pretty easily. A byproduct of me going so slow with my cuts is all these burn marks on the inside of the cut. However, because they're going to be interior, I didn't really care about them. So the next step was to realign the boards and tape them up to do a sort of dry test of my miter cuts and see how precise they were. Surprisingly, in this footage, the miter cuts look a little bit better than they did in person. To be honest, I wasn't super pleased with how it came out. There was a decent amount of space in a lot of the cuts. It didn't line up perfectly. It wasn't perfectly level when you placed it on the table. But I went ahead and finished my dry test anyway, using this new clamp that I got specifically for this purpose. Satisfied with my dry test, I laid out the pieces for gluing. After a little bit of wiping down and final sanding, I put a generous amount of Titebond on here, and then using my new glue brush, I just spread it out
and prepped it for clamping. After a few hours, I came back and unclamped the triangle. Now, while I was satisfied with the joints themselves, as you can see here, there are tons of gaps and misalignment all over this triangle. Any of the issues I had while cutting or setting up my table saw really just compounded. So, like any good woodworker, I went and grabbed my sander to cover up all my mistakes. After sanding down the sharp edges themselves, I was still left with the problem of gaps, so I continued to apply lipstick to this pig by going and grabbing a whole bunch of sawdust, mixing it up with some wood glue, and applying what I'm going to call woodworker's shapewear. I was really hoping for more accurate joints in this build, but everything's a learning process. And I will say I did learn from previous builds, and this time I did collect a whole bunch of sawdust, both rough and fine, to mix with the wood glue, as I was anticipating having gaps to fill anyways. So having that ready to go did make the end product a lot better. After another couple hours, I was satisfied that the glue sawdust mixture was dry enough and ready for sanding, and so I got back to everybody's favorite part. With the sanding done, it was ready to apply this hard wax oil by General Finishes. I have never used this before. I just went ahead and applied it like I would any other old stain with white rags. And to be honest, I am blown away by how good this stuff is. Obviously it's walnut, which is already a very beautiful wood, so it's going to just simply amplify the characteristics of the wood. But still, I must say, this is probably my favorite finish that I've tried to date. It definitely is one of the more expensive ones that I've tried, but the finish itself goes really, really far. You can spread it over a large surface area. And compared to a stain or a paint, it has basically no off-gassing, so I was able to use it inside. I did wear a mask, but honestly, you could probably get by with something more like a KN95 and be fine. Now, technically, this is a maintenance product, as it says on the can, so after a while, you may need to reapply or touch up the finish itself. But in general, so far, I am very pleased with this product. Obviously, again, this is on walnut, and I'll have to try it on a variety of different woods, but at least for woods that have really beautiful grain, this will probably become one of my go-tos. I let the hard wax oil dry thoroughly before wiping off any excess. I will say I'm also very pleased with how little excess there was. I've used Danish oil and that stayed oily for a while, but this dried very nicely, and after a quick final wipe down, it was about time to call this build done.
birthday gift. It's small.
Okay. I feel like I'm being punked. This is my book.
Oh, look inside.
Did you do this for all of my books?
Yeah.
How did you do that? For all of my books?
It took a long time.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
When did you do that?
Just whenever I could.
All of them?
Everyone I could find.
Holy cow! Wait, that's so crazy! Thank you!
You're welcome.
Holy cow! Did you put the date in?
I did date of publish and publisher, title, obviously author, as well as description if I have any like description.
You did the ones up there too.
Mm-hmm. All the ones in your office, all the ones in the hall, all the ones in the dining room, all the ones in the living room. Those.
When did you do that?
Over time, over a week or so.
I can't believe you did that. Wait, I've been meaning to do this for like my whole life.
I know. You just never had time.
Wow. That's so special. Thank you so much, babe.
You're welcome. So that's the first part of the gift, and the second part is, I don't have time to wrap it, but here you go. And I'll let you guess what it is.
It's a triangle.
Yes, it is a triangle.
Is it a book stand?
Yeah, go find a book that you don't think will damage the book binding if it's open. You open it to wherever you're reading, or the middle if you're just displaying it, and then you set it on top. Nope. No. No. Put it up like a tent, and then over the top. Hey, it works. It's a book holder.
That's kind of cool. It's really pretty. What is it made out of?
It's walnut.
It's really beautiful.
Thanks.
It's huge.
It's big. Well, you got some big books.
That's like so much work for that and this. This is really, really crazy. Thank you, baby.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider hitting that like button. It really helps this video cut through the noise and reach people who might find this interesting. If you want to see more storytelling build style videos like this, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Even though this ended up being a simpler build, I think it's really special, and every time she looks at it, she's going to remember the near countless hours that I spent cataloging her entire library. I really enjoyed focusing on the precise details of this build and trying to get better at my art. My goal is to get better with every single build, and I think I definitely took strides with this one. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.